going to review The Women's War by Jenna Glass, which I hated. This book was a poorly written fantasy that was trying to make points. It was trying to specifically make points about reproductive rights and women's rights and sexual assault, but it didn't make any points about any of those things. It failed to do really anything, including having nuanced conversation. All it did was repeat the same tired white feminist talking points. Like, that's really it. So let's talk about what the book was about. So this book is about, it's set in a world with several kingdoms, and you get several POVs from different people within the kingdoms, particular people that are of the like ruling classes of those kingdoms. You never really see any of the lower classes, which I think is a problem. So in this world, women are subjugated to varying degrees based on where they live, but they're all treated pretty poorly no matter what. So in this world, there is magic, and typically men are the magic users, and everybody has the ability to pull down their mind's eye, they call it, which is like a lens, which you see these magical things floating in the air, and you use them to do different things. It's got some kind of steampunk elements. They were very underutilized. So you can use these things to make spells or to make things that are like mechanical move. A woman creates a spell to change the place where the magic comes from, which is called wells. They're like wells of magic, I guess. It's kind of hard to explain because it was not really well explained in the book. So a woman casts a spell, a particular woman who's important to the story. A woman casts a spell to change the entire world by changing magic. So she creates a spell that allows women to decide whether or not they can become pregnant or even stay pregnant if they're already pregnant. There's some other parts to it that include basically if somebody sexually assaults you, you are able to use your magic to take revenge upon them, which has its problems in and of itself. Oy. Let me talk about the magic because that's a problem. Basically, in the air, you pull down your mind's eye and you see these different magical things called motes, and different ones do different things. You don't have like a glossary or index or anything to explain to you what these different things are. They're just like randomly thrown out throughout the story, and you easily forget what each one does. There's one called row that seemingly is like used versatilely. It's not a good system, and it suffered just like the rest of the book suffered because the author meant to make a point, and instead of creating a well-made fantasy series, she was just trying to make a point. That's really it. You don't really know how like big the motes are. She says they're like different colors, but it just was a poor system. On top of this, there's like references to magic and religion being tied together. Like people say, oh, by the mother. Who is the mother? Who? And why would the mother be a goddess in a world where women are so subjugated? If that was some sort of reference to like Mary, Mother of Jesus, it was lost on me. So in this world, women who are unwanted are sent to the home of the unwanted, which is an abbey. The Abbey of the Unwanted. So if a man decides he doesn't want his wife anymore, he can send her to the Abbey of the Unwanted, and she'll be an abbess, an Abigail. And at the Abbey, they are basically nuns, where they wear wimples, and that's really important to them, is their red wimple. But at the same time, they are also sex workers, and the portrayal of sex work in this is so bad because they're only there to have sex to make money for the crown, and there's never any talk of them like taking ownership of that. Like, some women might want to do that, but they're not like allowed to. It's just seen as, oh, sex work, how sad, how bad, oh no. It's like, okay, well, there's an empowering way to talk about sex work. Just no nuance conversation. On top of this, I just want to note that it makes it seem like this is the only brothel type place, because at one point the king says, I want to move the abbey to this like desolate place out in the middle of nowhere, from the city to a desolate place, so that it was a punishment for the women of the abbey. And and they're like, oh no, the men of the city are going to be so disappointed that they can't pay for sex anymore. But then that was like 20% of the book. Then at 60% of the book, they're talking about other brothels in the city. I was like, wait, what? That doesn't make any sense. All of the characters were terrible. All of them. The villains, who were all men, were all mustache twirly, and you could always tell if a villain was a guy or if a guy was a villain, because he was fat. This book was the most fat-phobic thing I have ever read in my life. There was an entire chapter 16, where a woman is trying to take revenge on this guy who has been like a predator, has taken advantage of her so many times. And instead of talking about his behavior, how he was treating her poorly, treating her as subhuman, the whole chapter went on and on and on about his fatness. His fatness, I think, was described more so than his poor and bad behavior. Like, is he bad because he's fat, or is he fat because he's bad? This also was present in one of our villains, Delnamal. He's like the main villainous dude of the story, and him being fat was mentioned over and over and over throughout the book, just repeatedly. And then there was like weird sexism and toxic masculinity within the writing of the book, where they would make fun of him for using women's stays to make him seem smaller. And I'm like, this is the most unfeminist feminist thing that I have ever read in my life. Are we really going to not only make fun of fat men, but men who are fat who are using a article of clothing that's typically reserved for women? What is this nonsense? So like emasculating him, that's what we're doing. Even his own sister, who's like the hero of the story, was wanting to make fun of him for wearing those. And it's like, this is awful. It just, as a whole, it did nothing to talk about patriarchy and toxic masculinity, honestly. Patriarchy and toxic masculinity typically are covert more than they are overt. And this book fails to speak on them in a nuanced way because it only makes them overt. It only makes them loud and horrible. The real villainous nature of patriarchy is in its subtlety, which is why it's so hard to combat and dismantle, because it's hard to explain how covert and small these things seem, but one after the other they team up to make this system of patriarchy. And it's like the whole system is just seeded with toxic masculinity and anti-women behavior and thought. And this book just had like nothing to say about that. It was like, men are bad because men say women bad. No, that's not it. Also, this book had no queer people. What? How are you going to talk about feminism without talking about queer people? What? And everyone was able-bodied. Apparently my son's upset about it too. Even the women who were sent to the Abbey of the Unwanted were able-bodied. This was a missed opportunity to talk about ableism. Like, you were already on your way there. Talking about how only women who can have heirs, children, are valued. Why would you not add in the conversation about ableism? Why not bring up right then how being able-bodied is seen as more valuable? And that's not the only ways in which this book fails to be intersectional in its feminism. The fact is, this book tried to take a real-world issue, and if you're going to take a real-world issue and turn it into a feminist fantasy book to try to have a conversation about it, then you need to bring all of the context of that issue, that real world issue, with you, and not just what you see through your white feminist lens. And this book did what white feminism consistently fails to do, which is center marginalized voices. If you're going to talk about reproductive rights and the oppression that comes along with that, Then you need to talk about the fact that women of color, including trans women, and not leave them out of the conversation. Women of color typically, statistically, deal with the issue of reproductive rights in all facets on an exponentially higher level. For instance, women of color, even when compared to their white peers who are of the same class level and the same, whether or not they have health insurance, women of color are 4 times more likely to die in childbirth or suffer pregnancy consequences than white women. Why? Because of institutionalized systemic racism in the medical community. So you're going to talk about reproductive rights, but you're not going to bring along that intersect of race and gender with you? Why? Instead, the author took some kind of cop-out and just made like most of her characters darker skinned, racially ambiguous, and then had one character be white, and she went on and on about how, oh, she's so pale, and in her country that's seen as beautiful, but she's just so pale. And it's like, no, that's not you being an ally. No. On top of all these issues, this book was so long for no reason. No reason. It's like 500 pages. It took me weeks to get through this because it slogged. It was horrible. So what happens is the author did not know how to cut down, and she would have the same interaction between characters multiple times when she could have trimmed them down from like 5 interactions to 2 and gotten the same amount of information. But she had to go on and on about her narration about how subjugated white women are, basically. I mean, she didn't say white women, but eventually that's just how I came to read it. Also, the men who were like the nicer men, they were still awful. Like at one point, Tinthanol, who's like the nice guy, buys this woman who he's into who's like older than him and who has been a sex worker, and the conversations they have surrounding that were really awkward. And then he buys her a dress and he's like, whenever you're ready. Oh my god, are you Rhysand? Oh, what a feminist. Oh, thank you for telling me that I can wear this dress when I'm ready to wear it. Like, no. Okay, I'm getting incoherent. This book was terrible. I gave it 1 star. This is bad. This is not feminism. This is nonsense. It's fat phobic. There's no reason to go on and on about fatness and how men are gross when they're fat and they're evil because they're fat and they're gross. No, that's not feminism. That's ridiculous. That's all I have to say about this book. I am disappointed. It completely wasted my time. It's not feminist. It's horrible. I want it to die in a fire. That's it. Okay, leave your comments down below. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.